The satellite feed flickered with infrared signatures scattered across the Afghan valley like dying embers. Colonel Marcus Thorne stared at the tactical display. His jaw clenched as radio chatter filled the operations tent. 12 Navy SEALs were pinned down in a compound 3 clicks from extraction, surrounded by Taliban fighters who turned what should have been a routine intelligence grab into a death trap. The mission clock showed 18 minutes since last contact. "Sir, we have 2 F-22s inbound, ETA 4 minutes," Lieutenant Rodriguez announced, his voice cutting through the tension. The Raptors were the obvious choice: precision strikes, minimal collateral damage, by-the-book engagement protocols. Thorne nodded, already mentally drafting the after-action report that would praise the textbook application of fifth-generation air superiority. That's when Captain Vesper Ghost Kellaway's voice crackled over the radio from her A-10 Thunderbolt II, circling 8,000 feet above the valley. "Control, this is Hog 17. I have eyes on the compound. Multiple heat signatures, friendlies are boxed in tight. Request permission to provide close air support." Thorne's response was immediate and sharp. "Negative, Hog 17. F-22s are handling this. Maintain your patrol sector." The dismissal in his voice was unmistakable. An A-10 pilot thinking she could outperform Raptors was exactly the kind of cowboy mentality that got people killed. Ghost's aircraft banked lazily in the thin mountain air, her GAU-8 cannon hanging beneath the nose like a sleeping predator. She'd flown these valleys for 8 months, knew every ridge and shadow. The Taliban had learned to fear the distinctive whine of her turbofan engines, but respect was something that seemed to evaporate the moment she landed back at base. 2 minutes out came the update on the F-22s. Below, muzzle flashes sparked in the compound courtyard like deadly fireworks. The SEALs' radio traffic was becoming increasingly desperate, ammunition counts dropping, wounded mounting. Ghost could see it all through her targeting pod: the way the enemy was positioned, the narrow window for engagement, the seconds ticking away like grains of sand. Colonel Thorne studied the real-time feed, calculating angles and blast radii. The F-22s would deliver their ordnance with surgical precision, but the setup looked wrong. Too many variables, too much risk. Something about the tactical picture nagged at him, a detail he couldn't quite grasp. 8,000 feet above, Ghost Kellaway made a decision that would either end her career or define it. Her thumb hovered over the radio transmit button as she rolled her A-10 into attack heading, the compound growing larger in her targeting display. Some battles weren't won by following orders. They were won by pilots who understood that sometimes the only way to save lives was to risk everything. The valley below waited in silence, holding its breath for what would come next. Static electricity seemed to dance across Ghost's instruments as she descended through 7,000 feet, the weight of disobedience pressing against her chest. Her A-10's titanium bathtub cockpit had protected countless pilots from ground fire, but there was no armor against the consequences of what she was about to do. The targeting computer painted green squares around enemy positions, but all she could think about were the 12 men whose lives hung in the balance. "Hog 17, I repeat, maintain patrol altitude." Colonel Thorne's voice cut through her headset with icy authority. Through the operations tent's multiple screens, he watched her aircraft's icon descending toward the engagement zone like a rogue star falling from orbit. His staff officers exchanged glances. Everyone knew Ghost Kellaway's reputation for aggressive tactics, but this was different. This was direct insubordination. The F-22s appeared as silver specks against the azure sky, their stealth profiles nearly invisible even at close range. Ghost's radio crackled with their coordination chatter, clinical and precise as they set up their attack runs. Raptor Lead was calculating release parameters for GPS-guided munitions, everything by the manual, everything safe and sterile from 40,000 feet. But Ghost saw what the satellite feed couldn't capture: the way shadows fell across the compound's eastern wall, the subtle movement patterns that suggested the Taliban had positioned heavy weapons in areas the F-22s couldn't effectively engage without risking the SEALs' lives. Her 8 months of daily combat sorties had taught her to read these valleys like sheet music, every ridge and ravine holding tactical significance that couldn't be transmitted through data links. 6,000 feet now, and the distinctive growl of her twin engines began to echo off the mountainsides. Below, Taliban fighters looked up nervously. They knew that sound, had learned to associate it with the devastating effectiveness of the GAU-8's 30mm depleted uranium rounds. But they also knew American pilots followed strict rules of engagement, procedures that could be exploited if you understood the system well enough. Ghost's hands moved across her controls with practiced fluency, adjusting trim tabs and weapon settings. The A-10 had been designed for one purpose: close air support in hostile environments. Every system on the aircraft reflected this singular mission, from the redundant hydraulics to the cross-linked flight controls that could keep the plane flying even with massive battle damage. She was about to test those systems in ways the engineers had never intended. "Control, Raptor lead is 30 seconds from release," came the transmission from the F-22 flight lead. His voice carried the confidence of a pilot accustomed to technological superiority, weapons that could strike with mathematical precision from distances that rendered the enemy irrelevant. Ghost checked her ammunition counter. 1,100 rounds of 30mm high-explosive incendiary remained in the cannon's drum. More than enough, if she could get close enough to use them effectively. The SEAL team's radio traffic was becoming increasingly fragmented, their calm professionalism cracking under sustained enemy fire. She rolled inverted at 5,000 feet, the Afghan landscape spinning above her canopy like a deadly kaleidoscope. The compound filled her targeting display, every muzzle flash and heat signature perfectly clear through her advanced sensors. This was the moment of truth. Commit to the attack, run or pull off, and let the F-22s handle it their way. Ghost's thumb found the transmit button, her voice steady despite the thundering of her heart. Colonel Thorne's tactical display showed chaos in digital precision. 3 aircraft converged on a single point in space and time, their flight paths creating a geometry of potential disaster. The F-22s maintained their assigned altitude, following engagement protocols with mechanical accuracy, while Ghost's A-10 dove toward the valley floor like a predator sensing wounded prey. Her aircraft's icon blinked red, unauthorized low altitude, outside assigned patrol parameters, direct violation of standing orders. Hog 17, you are ordered to abort immediately and return to patrol altitude, Thorne transmitted, his words carrying the full weight of military authority. Around him, the operations staff watched in tense silence as one of their own pilots chose battlefield intuition over command structure. This was the kind of incident that destroyed careers and filled investigation reports. But Ghost was already committed, her A-10 screaming earthward at 400 knots. The compound rushed up to meet her, every detail becoming crystal clear: the positions of enemy fighters, the desperate movements of friendly forces, the narrow windows of opportunity that existed for perhaps seconds before disappearing forever. Her targeting computer locked onto multiple threats, the aircraft systems responding to her inputs with mechanical precision. The Taliban fighters below had stopped shooting at the pinned SEALs, their attention drawn skyward by the approaching thunder of turbofan engines. They recognized the distinctive silhouette of the A-10, its twin vertical stabilizers and wing-mounted engines unmistakable against the mountain backdrop. Some began repositioning their heavy weapons, understanding that the American pilot was either very brave or completely insane. Ghost rolled level at 3,000 feet, her aircraft perfectly aligned with the compound's defensive positions. Through her canopy, she could see muzzle flashes winking like malevolent stars, enemy tracers reaching up toward her with lazy, deceptive curves. The SEAL team was clustered in the compound's northwest corner, their heat signatures distinct from the surrounding chaos through her thermal imaging system. Hog 17 has the compound in sight, she transmitted, her voice cutting through the radio static with Arctic calm. Beginning gun runs on marked positions. Danger close, acknowledge. The response from the pinned SEALs came immediately, their team leader's voice tight with controlled desperation. Hog 17, this is ground team actual. We copy danger close. You are cleared hot, repeat, cleared hot on all positions east and south of our location. We are running low on everything. Ghost's finger moved to the trigger, the GAU-8's firing mechanism armed and ready. Below her, the compound grew larger with each passing second, enemy positions becoming individual targets rather than abstract heat signatures. The F-22s circled high overhead, their precision weapons still calculating optimal release parameters, while the battle raged 3 miles beneath their operational altitude. This was the reality of close air support, not the sterile mathematics of high-altitude bombing, but the intimate violence of flying directly into enemy fire to save friendly lives. Ghost had done it dozens of times before, but never in direct defiance of explicit orders, never with her entire career hanging in the balance. The first burst from her cannon lit up the compound like lightning, 30mm rounds chewing through enemy positions with devastating efficiency. 30mm rounds struck the compound's eastern wall, with the sound of thunder rolling across the mountains. Ghost's GAU-8 cannon spat armor-piercing incendiary shells at 4,000 rounds per minute, each projectile carrying enough kinetic energy to punch through concrete and steel with contemptuous ease. The Taliban fighters who had been laying suppressive fire on the SEAL team simply vanished, their positions obliterated by the devastating accuracy of Ghost's first gun run. Colonel Thorne watched the engagement unfold through multiple camera feeds, his tactical display painting the destruction in sterile digital readouts. Enemy heat signatures disappeared one by one as Ghost's A-10 carved through their defensive line like a scythe through wheat. Her aircraft pulled up sharply after the firing pass, climbing away from the target area with practiced efficiency, while scattered secondary explosions marked the locations where ammunition caches had been hit. "Jesus Christ," whispered Lieutenant Rodriguez, his voice barely audible over the radio chatter. The compound's entire eastern perimeter had been effectively neutralized in a single 12-second burst. Ghost's targeting had been surgical, her rounds impacting within meters of friendly positions without causing any apparent collateral damage to the SEAL team. But the Taliban weren't finished. Heavy machine guns opened up from concealed positions along the compound's southern wall, their tracers reaching toward Ghost's climbing aircraft like angry red fingers. She rolled into a steep left bank, avoiding the worst of the ground fire while setting up for another attack run. The enemy had learned from years of fighting American air power. They knew to spread out, to use covered positions, to make themselves as difficult to target as possible. "Ground team actual, this is Hog 17, Ghost transmitted, her voice steady despite the anti-aircraft fire bursting around her aircraft. "I'm seeing heavy weapons positions along your southern perimeter. Can you mark your exact location with strobes?" The SEAL team leader responded immediately. "Hog 17, we're marking now. Be advised, we have 2 wounded and are down to our last magazines. Whatever you're going to do, do it fast." Ghost rolled inverted again, the compound spinning beneath her canopy as she lined up for her second attack run. The F-22s continued circling high overhead, their pilots undoubtedly frustrated by the rapidly evolving tactical situation. Their precision weapons were designed for static targets, not the fluid chaos of close air support where friendly and enemy positions shifted by the second. Through her targeting pod, Ghost could see the infrared strobes marking the SEAL team's position, a small cluster of heat signatures pressed against the compound's northwestern wall. The enemy had repositioned after her first attack, but they were still there, still shooting, still representing a deadly threat to the trapped Americans. Her cannon's ammunition counter showed 900 rounds remaining. The A-10 dove toward the compound again, It's titanium armor designed to absorb the kind of punishment that would destroy lesser aircraft. Ground fire intensified as the Taliban fighters recognized the threat, their bullets sparking off the aircraft's hardened surfaces without penetrating to critical systems. Ghost ignored the impacts. Her attention focused entirely on the targeting display, where enemy positions appeared as bright white rectangles against the thermal background. Her second gun run was even more precise than the first. The GAU-8's depleted uranium rounds tore through the southern defensive line, each burst carefully calculated to neutralize threats without endangering the SEAL team. Concrete walls exploded into clouds of dust and debris, heavy weapons positions disappeared in flashes of high-explosive destruction, and suddenly the compound fell silent except for the fatting echo of turbofan engines climbing away into the thin mountain air. "Ground Team Actual, Hog 17, Ghost transmitted, her voice carrying a note of cautious optimism. "Southern positions are neutralized. What's your status down there?" The response came after a long moment, the SEAL team leader's voice tight with emotion and exhaustion. "Hog 17, you beautiful bastard, the compound is secure. We're moving to extract now. Outstanding work up there." Ghost felt a surge of relief wash over her as she climbed back to patrol altitude. The immediate tactical problem had been solved. 12 American lives saved through aggressive action and precise gunnery. But the larger problem was just beginning. Colonel Thorne's voice crackled through her headset with ominous authority. "Hog 17, you will return to base immediately for debriefing." The flight back to Bagram Airfield passed in relative silence, Ghost's A-10 cutting through the afternoon sky with mechanical precision, while her mind raced through the potential consequences of her actions. She had saved the SEAL team, but she had also directly disobeyed explicit orders from a superior officer during active combat operations. Military justice was rarely kind to officers who placed individual judgment above command authority, regardless of the ultimate outcome. Her aircraft touched down on the dusty runway 30 minutes later, its landing gear absorbing the impact with familiar efficiency. Ground crews swarmed around the A-10 as Ghost shut down the engines, their practiced movements checking for battle damage and preparing the aircraft for post-flight inspection. She could see Colonel Thorne waiting near the operations building, his posture radiating the kind of controlled anger that preceded career-ending conversations. Ghost climbed down from her cockpit with deliberate calm, her flight suit bearing the subtle stains of 8 months in combat. The crew chief approached with a tablet showing the aircraft's status, minor damage from small arms fire, all systems operational, cannon ammunition expended as logged. Standard post-mission data that would become evidence in whatever proceedings followed. "Outstanding shooting today, Captain," the crew chief said quietly, his voice carrying the respect that enlisted personnel reserved for pilots who brought everyone home alive. "Word is already spreading about what you did for those SEALs." Ghost nodded acknowledgement but said nothing. The real test was walking toward her across the tarmac, his expression unreadable behind aviator sunglasses that reflected the harsh Afghan sun. Colonel Marcus Thorne had built his reputation on tactical excellence and strict adherence to proper procedures. She had just challenged both in the most public way possible. The debriefing room was small and sterile, its white walls decorated only with standard safety posters and a single American flag. Ghost sat across from Colonel Thorne, her hands folded calmly on the metal table between them. The digital recorder's red light indicated that every word would be preserved for whatever investigative process followed. "Captain Kellaway," Thorne began, his voice carrying the weight of formal military proceedings, "you directly violated explicit orders during today's engagement. You were instructed to maintain patrol altitude while F-22s handled the close air support mission. Instead, you conducted unauthorized attack runs that placed your aircraft and potentially friendly forces at unnecessary risk." Ghost met his gaze steadily. "Sir, I observed that the F-22s' engagement parameters would not effectively neutralize the threats facing the SEAL team. The tactical situation required immediate close air support using precision cannon fire, which the Raptors could not provide. That determination was not yours to make, Thorne replied sharply. Chain of command exists for a reason, Captain. When combat operations become a democracy of individual opinions, people die. The room fell silent except for the hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of aircraft engines outside. Ghost understood the colonel's position. He was responsible for dozens of aircraft and hundreds of personnel, all operating within carefully constructed rules of engagement designed to minimize risk and maximize effectiveness. Her decision to ignore those rules, regardless of outcome, represented a fundamental challenge to the system that kept everyone alive. But she also understood something else, something that couldn't be easily quantified in after-action reports or tactical assessments. She had looked into those valleys every day for 8 months, had seen how the enemy adapted and evolved, had developed an intuitive understanding of Afghan combat operations that could only come from sustained exposure to the unique challenges of mountain warfare. "Sir, with respect," Ghost said finally, "those 12 SEALs are going home to their families tonight because someone made the right tactical decision at the right moment." The observation of results versus methodology hung in the air between them, highlighting the eternal military tension between following orders and achieving objectives. Colonel Thorne had to decide whether Ghost's actions represented dangerous insubordination or exactly the kind of tactical initiative that won wars. The choice would define not just her career, but the precedent for how unconventional thinking would be handled in his command. Outside, the sun was beginning to set over the Hindu Kush, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson that reminded everyone why Afghanistan was called the crossroads of empires. The investigation began 48 hours later with the arrival of a full colonel from Air Combat Command, his crisp uniform and briefcase full of regulations marking him as someone far removed from the daily realities of combat operations. Colonel Patricia Hensley had built her career on military law and procedural compliance, making her the perfect choice to examine Ghost's actions through the lens of proper command authority. Ghost stood at attention in the same debriefing room, watching Hensley arrange documents with mechanical precision. The investigating officer's questions would be thorough and unforgiving, designed to determine whether disciplinary action was warranted for what some were already calling the most egregious case of insubordination in recent Air Force memory. "Captain Kellaway," Hensley began, her voice carrying the detached professionalism of someone who had conducted hundreds of similar investigations. "Let's start with your understanding of the chain of command and the circumstances that led to your decision to disregard direct orders from Colonel Thorne." Ghost had rehearsed this moment dozens of times, knowing that her words would be analyzed for any sign of defiance or disrespect toward proper authority. The military justice system had little tolerance for officers who placed personal judgment above institutional hierarchy, regardless of their motivations or ultimate success. "Ma'am, I understood my orders clearly," Ghost replied, her voice steady and professional. "I was instructed to maintain patrol altitude while F-22s conducted the close air support mission. However, my assessment of the tactical situation indicated that the prescribed engagement method would not effectively neutralize the threats facing friendly forces." Colonel Hensley made notes on her legal pad, her pen moving with the same mechanical precision that characterized everything about her presence. "Captain, your assessment of the tactical situation is not relevant to the fundamental question of military discipline. You were given explicit orders by your commanding officer during active combat operations. You chose to ignore those orders. Is that correct?" The room seemed to shrink around Ghost as she considered her response. Military law was remarkably clear on the subject of disobedience, Intentions and outcomes were secondary to the primary requirement of following lawful orders from superior officers. Her actions, however successful, represented a clear violation of basic military discipline. But there was another element to consider, one that complicated the seemingly straightforward legal framework. Military officers were also expected to exercise tactical judgment, to adapt to changing circumstances, to make split-second decisions that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The tension between obedience and initiative had defined military leadership for centuries. "Yes, ma'am," Ghost answered finally. "I disobeyed Colonel Thorne's explicit orders because I believed that following them would result in the deaths of 12 American servicemen." Colonel Hensley looked up from her notes, her expression unreadable behind wire-rimmed glasses that reflected the room's fluorescent lighting. "Captain, you believed. Military operations are not conducted based on individual beliefs or hunches. They are conducted according to established procedures, proper planning, and clear command authority." Ghost felt the weight of her career pressing down like the thin air at high altitude. Everything she had worked for, every mission she had flown, every life she had saved or enemy position she had destroyed, all of it could disappear because she had trusted her instincts over institutional protocol. The irony was not lost on her that the same aggressive tactical thinking that made her effective in combat could destroy her future in the peacetime military. "Ma'am, I understand the importance of following orders," Ghost said, choosing each word carefully. "But I also understand that our primary mission is to protect American lives and complete our assigned objectives. In this case, following orders would have compromised both." The investigation continued for 6 hours, Colonel Hensley methodically examining every aspect of Ghost's decision-making process, her previous combat record, and her relationships with other personnel in the squadron. Character witnesses were interviewed, flight records analyzed, and psychological evaluations scheduled to determine whether Ghost's actions represented a pattern of insubordination or an isolated incident of poor judgment. The SEAL team's after-action report complicated the proceedings significantly. Their detailed account of the engagement praised Ghost's tactics as textbook close air support and credited her intervention with saving their lives. Team leader Master Chief Tony Castellano submitted a formal commendation request, describing her actions as the finest example of combat aviation I have witnessed in 15 years of special operations. But military justice operated according to different principles than battlefield effectiveness. The system that had evolved over centuries of warfare demanded predictability, hierarchy, and absolute adherence to proper authority. Individual initiative, however successful, represented a potential threat to the good order and discipline that kept military organizations functioning under extreme stress. Colonel Hensley's preliminary findings would determine Ghost's immediate future: continued service, formal reprimand, court-martial, or administrative separation from the Air Force. Each option carried its own consequences, its own impact on the lives of everyone involved in the incident. The investigation had become about more than one pilot's career. It had become a test of how the modern military balanced innovation with institutional stability. 3 days into the investigation, an unexpected voice entered the conversation. General Patricia Morrison, commander of Air Force's Central Command, arrived at Bagram without fanfare or advance notice. Her presence immediately elevated the Ghost Kellaway incident from a routine disciplinary matter to something approaching a defining moment for Air Force tactical doctrine. Morrison had flown A-10s during the Gulf War, accumulating over 3,000 combat hours in aircraft identical to the one Ghost piloted. She understood both the capabilities and limitations of close air support missions in ways that staff officers and legal investigators could never fully appreciate. Her arrival suggested that higher command was taking a personal interest in how the incident was resolved. "I want to speak with Captain Kellaway," Morrison announced, her 3 stars carrying the authority to override any procedural objections from the investigating team. The interview was scheduled for the following morning, giving Ghost 24 hours to prepare for what could be the most important conversation of her military career. That evening, Ghost walked the perimeter of Bagram's flight line, watching maintenance crews prepare aircraft for the next day's missions. The familiar sounds of military aviation, hydraulic pumps, auxiliary power units, the distant whine of jet engines, provided a soundtrack to her contemplation of an uncertain future. Everything she had worked for hung in the balance, awaiting the judgment of officers who would evaluate her actions through the competing lenses of military discipline and tactical effectiveness. Her A-10 sat in its revetment, mission-ready despite the administrative chaos surrounding its pilot. The aircraft's battle-scarred exterior told the story of 8 months in combat, each dent and scratch representing a moment when American ground forces had depended on her skills and judgment. Tomorrow, she would learn whether that service record outweighed a single decision to place mission accomplishment above strict obedience to orders. The stars above Afghanistan burned with the same intensity they had shown throughout human history, indifferent to the small dramas of military discipline and career advancement playing out beneath their light. But for Ghost Kellaway, those distant suns illuminated questions that would define not just her own future, but the Air Force's approach to tactical innovation in an era of rapidly evolving warfare. The meeting with General Morrison took place in a secure conference room normally reserved for mission planning and intelligence briefings. Ghost entered to find the 3-star general studying a detailed map of the valley where the SEAL rescue had taken place, her finger tracing the flight paths that had led to the controversial engagement. The room felt charged with the kind of tension that preceded life-changing decisions. "Captain Kellaway," Morrison began without preamble, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected thousands of lives. "I've reviewed your service record, the investigation findings, and the after-action reports from all involved parties. What I want to understand is your thought process during those critical minutes when you decided to engage against explicit orders." Ghost had prepared for this moment, but standing before one of the Air Force's most senior combat commanders made her previous rehearsals seem inadequate. Morrison wasn't interested in legal technicalities or procedural compliance. She wanted to understand the tactical thinking that had driven Ghost's decision-making under extreme pressure. "Ma'am, I had been flying combat sorties in that valley system for 8 months, Ghost began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "I understood the terrain, the enemy tactics, and the limitations that altitude and engagement parameters would impose on the F-22s. Based on my assessment, their precision weapons could not effectively neutralize the threats without unacceptable risk to friendly forces." Morrison nodded slightly, her expression revealing nothing about her evaluation of Ghost's reasoning. "Captain, every pilot in theater has opinions about optimal tactics and engagement methods. What made your opinion worth risking your career and potentially compromising command authority?" The question cut to the heart of military leadership, the balance between individual expertise and institutional hierarchy. Ghost understood that her answer would determine not just her personal future, but potentially influence how the Air Force approached similar situations in the years to come. "Ma'am, I didn't believe my opinion was worth more than command authority," Ghost replied carefully. "I believed that 12 American lives were worth more than my career. The tactical situation was developing faster than our command structure could adapt. Someone had to make a decision, and I was in the best position to make it effectively." General Morrison stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the flight line where dozens of aircraft represented America's commitment to the global war on terror. Her silence stretched for long moments, creating a tension that seemed to fill the room with unspoken possibilities. When she finally turned back to face Ghost, her expression had shifted subtly. Captain, in 32 years of military service, I have seen officers who follow orders without question and officers who question orders without following them. Both approaches have their place, but neither defines exceptional military leadership. What defines exceptional leadership is the wisdom to know when rules serve the mission, and when the mission requires setting rules aside. Ghost felt a flicker of hope, but kept her expression carefully neutral. General Morrison's words suggested a different perspective on the incident, one that evaluated actions through the lens of mission effectiveness rather than strict procedural compliance. But senior officers were skilled at maintaining ambiguity until final decisions were made. The preliminary investigation recommends disciplinary action for insubordination, Morrison continued, her voice revealing nothing about her personal opinion of that recommendation. Colonel Hensley has built a solid case that your actions represent a clear violation of military discipline that cannot be overlooked without undermining command authority throughout the theater. The words hit Ghost like anti-aircraft fire, confirming her worst fears about the investigation's direction. Military justice prioritized institutional stability over individual circumstances, and her case represented exactly the kind of precedent that threatened good order and discipline across the entire command structure. However, Morrison added, her tone shifting slightly, I have also received formal commendations from the SEAL team you saved, their commanding officer, and 3 separate Air Force units that witnessed your tactical execution. Master Chief Castellanos used words like magnificent and heroic in his official statement. Those are not terms that special operations professionals use lightly. Ghost remained at attention, afraid to interpret the general's comments as anything approaching vindication. Senior military officers were masters of strategic communication, capable of delivering both praise and condemnation in ways that revealed nothing about ultimate intentions until the final moment of decision. General Morrison returned to her chair, her movements deliberate and controlled. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of command decision that would end the uncertainty and define Ghost's future in the United States Air Force. Captain Kellaway, you will report to the Pentagon next month for assignment to the weapons school as an instructor pilot. Your experience in Afghanistan represents exactly the kind of tactical innovation we need to develop in the next generation of close air support aviators. The Air Force needs officers who understand both the importance of following orders and the wisdom to know when extraordinary circumstances demand extraordinary responses. The words seemed to echo in the small room, transforming everything Ghost had understood about the consequences of her actions. Instead of court-martial and career termination, she was being offered one of the most prestigious assignments in the Air Force, a position that would allow her to shape tactical doctrine and train future combat pilots in the lessons learned from 8 months of Afghan combat operations. Ma'am, I don't understand, Ghost managed, her professional composure finally cracking under the weight of unexpected reprieve. The investigation recommended disciplinary action. Colonel Hensley's report clearly established that I violated direct orders during combat operations. Morrison smiled for the first time during the interview, her expression revealing the kind of satisfaction that came from making decisions that served both justice and institutional needs. Captain, Colonel Hensley's investigation established that you placed mission accomplishment and the welfare of American servicemen above strict adherence to procedural compliance. Those are exactly the priorities we want to encourage in our combat leaders. The assignment to weapons school carried implications beyond personal vindication. Ghost would be responsible for developing close air support doctrine based on her experiences in Afghanistan, training instructor pilots who would carry those lessons to operational squadrons throughout the Air Force. Her controversial decision had been transformed from career-ending insubordination into a teaching moment that would influence American air power for years to come. Ma'am, thank you, Ghost said, her voice thick with emotion she had been suppressing for days. "I won't disappoint the confidence you're placing in me." General Morrison stood, extending her hand in congratulation. "Captain, you already proved your worth in the skis over Afghanistan. Now you'll have the opportunity to pass that knowledge on to pilots who will face similar challenges in future conflicts. The Air Force needs officers who understand that sometimes the most important orders are the ones we give ourselves when institutional authority cannot adapt quickly enough to battlefield reality." As Ghost walked back to her quarters, the Afghan sunset painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson that seemed to celebrate the unexpected turn her career had taken. The investigation that had threatened to end everything had instead opened doors she had never imagined possible. But more importantly, it had validated the tactical thinking that had saved 12 American lives in a valley where seconds had mattered more than procedures. The news of Ghost's assignment to weapons school spread through the squadron within hours, generating reactions that ranged from admiration to bewilderment. Some pilots saw her promotion as vindication of aggressive tactical thinking, while others worried about the precedent it might set for future challenges to command authority. The incident had become a case study in military leadership that would be debated in classrooms and officers' clubs for years to come. Colonel Thorne requested a private meeting with Ghost before her departure from Bagram, an encounter both officers approached with considerable uncertainty. Their professional relationship had been fundamentally altered by the events of the SEAL rescue, creating a dynamic that required careful navigation to preserve mutual respect and institutional harmony. "Captain Kellaway," Thorne began as they met in his office, "I want you to understand that my objections to your actions were not personal. Command authority and good order and discipline are essential to military effectiveness. When officers begin making individual decisions about which orders to follow, the entire system becomes unreliable." Ghost nodded, understanding the colonel's position even as she maintained her conviction that circumstances had demanded exceptional action. "Sir, I never intended to undermine command authority or set a precedent for insubordination. I simply believed that the tactical situation required immediate adaptation that our existing procedures could not accommodate." The conversation that followed explored the complex relationship between individual judgment and institutional hierarchy, two forces that both strengthened and potentially threatened military effectiveness. Both officers understood that their experience had highlighted fundamental tensions in how modern warfare balanced traditional command structures, with the need for tactical innovation under rapidly changing conditions. "Captain, your assignment to weapons school suggests that higher command views your actions as instructionally valuable rather than disciplinary problems," Thorne observed. "I hope you'll use that platform to help future officers understand both the tactical reasoning that drove your decisions and the institutional considerations that make such decisions inherently risky." Ghost left Afghanistan 2 weeks later, her A-10 replaced by another pilot who would continue the daily combat sorties that defined American air operations in the region. As her transport aircraft climbed away from Bagram, she watched the familiar valleys disappear beneath clouds, taking with them 8 months of experiences that had transformed her from a competent pilot into a tactical innovator, whose decisions would influence Air Force doctrine for years to come. The flight to the United States provided time for reflection on how a single combat engagement had altered the trajectory of her career and potentially influenced the broader military's approach to tactical decision-making under extreme pressure. The controversy that had threatened to destroy her professional future had instead opened opportunities to shape the next generation of combat aviators through the most prestigious training assignment in the Air Force. Arriving at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada, Ghost found herself in an environment dedicated to tactical excellence and innovative thinking. The weapons school represented the Air Force's commitment to developing combat leaders who could adapt to changing battlefield conditions while maintaining the institutional knowledge that made American air power globally dominant. Her controversial experience in Afghanistan had become the qualification that made her valuable as an instructor. The weapons schools mission was to produce graduates who could return to operational squadrons as tactical experts and leaders, carrying advanced knowledge of air-to-air and air-to-ground combat techniques that would enhance mission effectiveness across the entire Air Force. Ghost's assignment as an A-10 instructor pilot placed her at the center of close air support doctrine development, responsible for translating combat experience into academic curricula that would prepare future pilots for similar challenges. Her first class included 12 experienced pilots from operational squadrons, each selected for demonstrated tactical proficiency and leadership potential. The students represented the Air Force's investment in continuous tactical innovation, officers who would return to their units as subject matter experts capable of elevating overall squadron performance through advanced training and mission planning expertise. "Gentlemen and ladies," Ghost began during her first lecture, standing before a classroom equipped with advanced simulation technology and tactical displays. "Close air support is fundamentally about making life-and-death decisions with incomplete information under extreme time pressure. Everything else, weapons systems, communication protocols, engagement parameters, is subordinate to that basic reality." The curriculum Ghost developed drew heavily on her Afghan experience, particularly the incidents that had tested the limits of traditional tactical doctrine. She taught students to recognize the subtle indicators that suggested when established procedures might not effectively address rapidly evolving battlefield conditions, while emphasizing the institutional considerations that made such recognition inherently dangerous from a career perspective. "The challenge," she explained during a lesson on tactical decision-making, "is developing the judgment to know when exceptional circumstances demand exceptional responses. This requires understanding not just the technical aspects of weapons employment, but the strategic and political context that shapes our rules of engagement and command relationships." Students responded to Ghost's teaching with enthusiasm and respect that reflected her reputation as both a tactical expert and an officer who had successfully navigated the complex